Alrighty. Good morning and happy Sabbath to everybody once again. We are live. I am the King's Bard, and welcome to our Bible study section. This is one of the best sections. I love it so much. Studying the Bible, and it's just amazing. There's so much to learn and just so much to share as well. If you are new here, if you're here for the first time, welcome to you. I'm very glad to see you. If you're watching via the recorded videos as well, or rather the recorded live stream, then welcome to you as well. It is fantastic to see you. I think, what do they call them? VODs, don't they? If you're watching the VOD, greetings to you. So, that being said, yeah, I am the King's Bard. This is part 4 of Fullness, which is a series that we have been doing for a little while now. We did have a break last week, so there was no stream, there was no study, anything like that last week. So we are going to be continuing that this week. This is the last in this series. However, we are going to be beginning a new series next week that focuses on something else, the subject of which we will find out by the end of today's study. So please do join us for that. That being said, if you want to know more, if you want to see more videos, anything like this, if you want to see more VODs, if you want to have more, if you want to kind of get some background on these things, or look at some other studies that I've done, they are archived on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook page. I am also there. So please do join us for that. I'm really please look at those videos, check that out. Once again, I am the King's Bard. You can see the spelling right there on the screen. I'm really glad to have everyone here with us today. I don't want to if you have not already, please hit that like button. If you're on Facebook, then go ahead and also share and like the page as well, so you can get notifications and things for when we do go live. And the same thing as well with my YouTube channel. Please do like that as well. Like the video, and also hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you can get updates. I do put out videos other than just VODs, so please do check that out. Really looking forward to seeing everyone there. That being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. And of course, as always, the better half of Bible study is prayer. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So let's open up with a word of prayer, and then we shall get started. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace, for your love, for your mercy, for your tenderness, and for your compassion. And Lord, I just thank you as well for the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ, and I just ask that you would please be with us now as we open up your word. I ask that you would please lead us and guide us, that you would teach and that you would speak, and that we would remain silent and hear you, that we would understand and comprehend the things that have been presented. And I ask as well that you would please bring people who need to hear. Even if it's not to the live stream directly, please bring people to the videos. Thank you so much again for everything that you have done, and above all else, let Jesus be lifted up. Thank you. In his name we pray and ask all these things, and thank you. Amen. Alrighty. Thank you very much once again for everyone for being here. We're going to begin our Bible study, Fullness, Part 4, the High Priest. So let's go ahead and dive right on in. Of course, this question here that we're going to be asking today is a very, very important question. What is Jesus' role after the cross? Does he have one? What is Jesus doing now? These are questions that a lot of people have. But unfortunately, even though the Bible is very clear on the subject, not a lot of people know the answer to these things. The usual answer might be, well, hey, what's Jesus doing right now in heaven? Oh, well, he's preparing mansions for us. And that's not wrong, but there's more to it than that. And so we're going to be taking a look at that today. What is Jesus' role after the cross? Is there one after the cross? Well, we're going to be in the book of Hebrews for most of our study today. So we're going to open up to the book of Hebrews chapter 4, which starts us off strong. Hebrews is a fascinating book. Nobody really knows who wrote it, although there are different theories. Me personally, I think that it was probably Paul, and in fact, more than anything else, I suspect that this was probably a transcribed sermon that was then had an addendum on the end, because this just the way that it's written, it sounds like it was spoken, and not just spoken or dictated, but actually spoken in a sermon. So I personally think that this is a dictated, or not a dictated, a transcribed sermon that was preached by Paul at some point in his life. Maybe, who knows? There are other theories out there as well, so you never know. But this is still a really interesting and fascinating book. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 and 15, and that's where we are going to be starting today. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. And we're going to go ahead and read that here. Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not an high priest which cannot be For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. This is a fascinating passage, and it's one of the foundational passages that are here in the book of Hebrews, upon which pretty much everything else is founded. What is Jesus' work in heaven at this point? Oh, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions or any comments or anything like that, please do leave them in the chat. I will really am interested in doing, and I want to make sure that there are plenty of people who were able to get questions answered. There's no such thing as a bad question. The question here, what is Jesus' work? What is he doing? Well, if we look in verse 14, seeing then that we have a great high priest. Jesus is a high priest. And what does the text say is significant about having Jesus as our high priest? It says that he knows our weaknesses, because he was in all points tempted like as we are, but he didn't sin. To be a human, he knows what it's like to have our weaknesses, because he dealt with them himself. He has been tempted like us. He has been tried like us. He's gone through loss like we have. He lost his father when he was young. He lost good friends. He experienced betrayal. Important for us to recognize, and that's why it's so significant that Jesus is in fact our high priest. It's just so incredibly important, and it's amazing that it is the case. What does Jesus do, though, as our high priest? This is a big question as well. Okay, he's the high priest, and he's in heaven, right? He's the high. We don't have a high. What does a high priest do? Because that's a really big question. Hebrews chapter 8 and verses 1 through 3. And I'll read these as well. Hebrews 8, 1 through 3. Now, of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. That is, this is the summary of the things we've been talking about. We have such an high priest, who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, and not man. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices, wherefore it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also to offer. Question: what does a high priest do? According to these verses, what does a high priest do? Well, we can find the answer in verse 3. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices. Gifts and sacrifices. These are what, according to this, a high priest does. What would Jesus be doing then? Sacrifices, but what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, we can get a better idea here in Hebrews chapter 7, verse man, speaking of Jesus, because he continueth ever, that is, that he goes on forever and ever, hath an unchangeable priesthood. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens, who needed not daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins and then for the people's. For this he did once, when he offered up himself. So, question. What does the text say that Jesus is doing? He is also able to save them, that is, us, to the uttermost that come unto God by him. So those that come to Jesus, those that come to God through Jesus, he is able to save to the uttermost, because he constantly lives. He lives forever to make intercession for them, that is, for those who come unto God through him. And so we have one thing here, that Jesus is interceding for us. He is speaking on our behalf favorably to God, which is a huge, huge, huge function. This is where Jesus is actually saying, this person is, this person is coming to you through me. Look favorably on him or her, because they are coming through me. As our defense attorney, if you will. But now this is a really interesting question. Here's something else that Jesus is doing. He has offered up himself as the sacrifice. Offered sacrifices constantly, but they didn't offer themselves, right? Jesus is offering himself up. And there is something else that's once again, we see here in verse 27, the priests of earth, they offered up sacrifices daily. First for their own sins, and then for the sins of the people. Jesus didn't need to offer it up for his own sins, right? Because he never sinned. But on top of that, he also didn't have to die more than once. He didn't need to keep dying. He didn't need to do anything like that. Jesus died once, and that was that. He didn't need to die again. So that's a bit of a, that helps us understand what he's doing. But we do want to get an idea of where he's doing it. And this is something that, you might think, oh, well, there's a simple answer to this. And yes, there is. But it's also a lot more complicated than people realize. Let's go to let's look back here in Hebrews 8, verses 1 through 5. Hebrews 8, verses 1 through 5. As we look at the question, where does... Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest, who is set on the right hand of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, and not man. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices, wherefore it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also to offer. For if he were on earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern shewed to thee in the mount. How does the author describe where Jesus is ministering? How does the author describe where Jesus is ministering? The answer can be found in verse 2 and also in verse 5, but especially in verse 2. Jesus is described as a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. And in verse 5, speaking of earthly priests, these people serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee on the mount. So, once again, you have a tabernacle, a sanctuary that is mentioned here. It's really interesting, but where is that located? Where is the sanctuary? Where is this tabernacle located? Well, simple enough. Simple enough. Verse 5 says the example and shadow of heavenly things. And of course, also in verse 1 of chapter 8, it says that Jesus is sitting in the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. So very clearly, this is in heaven. Now, that leads us to a very, very important question. What is the sanctuary or tabernacle? Because those are words that, don't know. Maybe. Haven't run across that in the New Testament. Maybe there's something in the Old Testament. Well, first, though, let's look at what Hebrews has to say on that. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 1 to 5. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 1 to 5. Like I said, we're in Hebrews a lot today. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 1 to 5. Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. So when is this happening? The first covenant, or the old covenant, the Old Testament. For there was a tabernacle made, the first, wherein the first, that is the first place, or the first tabernacle, first chamber, wherein was the candlestick, and the table, and the shewbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all. So tabernacle is referencing specifically rooms in something bigger. And the King James is not the best translation for this, although it is sometimes better than the New King James, but sometimes not. Sanctuary is the translation, and I don't have this, I didn't think about it, but the word sanctuary here in Hebrews 9 is actually the Greek word hagia, or hagion, which means holy or holy place. Whereas holiest of all in verse 3 is the Greek phrase hagia hagion, or holy of holies. And so the King James here is better than the New King James, but it's still not it's still not the absolute best translation. But it is better. And continuing on here, I'll reread verse 3. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, or the room, which is called the holiest of all, Hagia Hagion, the Holy of Holies, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant, overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant, and over it the cherubims of glory, shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly. Question. What's the author describing here? And do I have... Are people available to answer questions now? Oh, okay. Alrighty. What is the author describing here? This is actually something that you can go back all the way, as I mentioned, to the Old Testament, as the text says very clearly. This is referring to an Old Testament system, or an Old Testament... it's kind of like the temple. In fact, the temple was basically a giant version of this, and a permanent version of this. When was this tabernacle or sanctuary made? Well, that's easy enough. You can find it here in verse 1. Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. You can also find it once again in Hebrews 8, verse 5. Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. So this was made in the time of Moses, which is a very, very interesting point. So, what does this tent from Moses' time have to do with Jesus? That's a big question. What in the world do these two things have in common? Why is this author of Hebrews using this as something to be connected to Jesus? Obviously it is connected because this is a biblical writer, so it's inspired. So, but how? What are the connections? Well, let's see. We can go to verse 24 of Hebrews 9 for the answer to that question. Hebrews 9:24. For Christ is not entered into the holy places, or the sanctuaries, the same word, made with hands, but which are figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Where has Jesus gone to minister? The holy places not made with hands, but into heaven itself. So there is clearly there is something going on, something connecting the sanctuary to heaven. There is a holy place or a sanctuary that is in heaven. This is interesting stuff. The author describes the old sanctuary here in verse 24 as holy places made with hands, which are figures or symbols of the true. So all that stuff in the Old Testament, which we will be taking a brief look at, all of those things are symbols of the true. They're figures, they're patterns. You can find both of those words used in the King James Version, at least, of Hebrews over and over and over again when referencing the worldly sanctuary or the earthly sanctuary. You had the sanctuary of the Old Testament. You find over and over and over again this earthly tabernacle, the sanctuary, is referenced as a symbol, as a figure, as a pattern, or as something that has been patterned after something else. This is very, very clearly something that is showing that there is a real deal up in heaven. These are just scale models, so to speak. And just, again, to kind of take a look at this in Hebrews 8, verses 1 and 2. Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, and not man. Where is Jesus ministering? In heaven. And, more specifically, the sanctuary and the true tabernacle, which God pitched instead of man. So we have this sanctuary, this tabernacle, this temple that's not made with human hands, that's in heaven. Now, once again, I'm summarizing here, putting it in my own words. I do want to point out, everything that I've said here so far, I've not pulled out of a hat. I've looked at the book of Hebrews and just straight pulled it out. Some people will disagree with this, or will claim that this is sectarianism, or that this is a false doctrine. But it's very clearly portrayed here in the Bible. There is a heavenly sanctuary. There is a heavenly sanctuary structure here, so to speak. There is something after which the earthly sanctuary was modeled. And that thing that was the model, or the pattern for the earthly sanctuary, is in heaven. So there is a sanctuary in heaven. That the earthly sanctuary can give us an idea of what it looks like or what its purpose is. So what did the old sanctuary look like? Well, we can find this here in, this is a long passage, Exodus chapter 40. Exodus chapter 40, verses 17 to 33. As I said, it's a very long one. Exodus chapter 40, verses 17 to 33. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and describe this here. And so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to read here. Again, Exodus 40, verses 17 to 33. And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up. And Moses reared up the tabernacle, and fastened his sockets, and set up the boards thereof, and put in the bars thereof, and reared up his pillars. So he's setting up the actual building, right? Which is a portable building, by the way. Everything in the sanctuary was everything in the tabernacle was designed to be portable, to be carried, because at this point the Hebrews were nomads. They had to carry things. They were wandering around in the wilderness, so they had to carry this around with them as portable temple, basically. So once Moses has actually built the structure, the physical structure, he spread abroad the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent above upon it, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he took and put the testimony, or the 10 Commandments, into the ark, and set the staves, or which is what they carried the ark with, on the ark, and put the mercy seat, or the lid, above, which had the 2 cherubim, the 2 angels, on it. They put the mercy seat above upon the ark, so they set it down, they closed the lid. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle and set up the veil of the covering. So he brings it into the building, and he puts up a veil between the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant is and the rest of the actual physical building. And covered the ark of the testimony as the Lord commanded Moses. So the veil is covering it. And he put the table of showbread, in the tent of the congregation upon the side of the tabernacle northward, without or outside the veil. So this is in the holy place now. You have a table that's on the north side. And he set the bread in order upon it before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded Moses. 6 loaves of flat bread, pretty much, on either side. 2 stacks of 6 loaves. And he put the candlestick, the menorah, in the, what a lot of people would think of as a menorah, over against the table. So on the opposite side of the table, on the side of the tabernacle southward. So you have the table on the north, the lampstand, the candlestick on the south side. And he lighted the lamps before the Lord as the Lord commanded Moses. And he put the golden altar, or the altar of incense, in the tent of the congregation before the veil. So, and I'll show you a picture of this here. I have a picture here that we'll talk about in a minute. The golden altar, the altar of incense in the tent of the congregation right in front of the veil. And he burned sweet incense thereon, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he set up the hanging at the door of the tabernacle. So another veil, right, that lets you into the tabernacle itself is the door. And he put the altar of burnt offering by the door of the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation, and offered upon it the burnt offering and the meat offering, or the food offering, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he set the laver, which is a wash basin, basically, at least that shape, between the tent of the congregation and the altar, and put water there to wash withal. And Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and their feet thereat. When they went into the tent of the congregation, and when they came near unto the altar, they washed, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he reared up the court round about the tabernacle and the altar, and set up the hanging of the court gate. So Moses finished the work. So what did the old sanctuary look like? Well, first, you had a courtyard. This was a bunch of pillars around in a square. You can see it here on your screen. It was a bunch of pillars that could be dismantled at any time, and there was a cloth screen, basically a bunch of sheets, if you will, that were hanging down so that you couldn't see inside. And then at the east side, there was a gate, right? So on your screen, it'll be on your right-hand side. That's where the gate would be. And that veil, that was not the rest of the tabernacle, the rest of the courtyard was white, but the door was blue with scarlet trim. And so you had through the gate, you came from the east going into the west. After that, you had a physical tabernacle building, and for some reason, let's go ahead. You had a physical tabernacle building, right? And it was a building, but it was also a tent. It had walls, but it was also a tent. It had a covering over the top. And its building, it was panels that you could assemble and disassemble wherever you wanted, or whenever you needed to take it down. Whenever they were moving on, they would disassemble the whole wall of the tabernacle. And the whole thing came apart. It's kind of like Lego pieces, right? You just take it apart. But it was panels instead. And then inside the tabernacle building itself, the tent itself, you had a veil that would separate one compartment from another. The first compartment, the bigger compartment, was the holy place, again referenced as the Hagia, or the Hagion rather, in Hebrews. It's the holy place, or the sanctuary. And then the smaller apartment, the smaller tabernacle, or the small room, which was separated by the veil, was known as the Holy of Holies, Hagia Hagion, the holiest of holy places. Inside the Holy of Holies, you had the Ark of the Covenant. I'm not very detailed here, so again, I'm just using rectangles and circles. And squares. That's pretty much what I'm using. So not a lot of detail here. But you had the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark of the Covenant, you had first and foremost the Ten Commandment law. This was the foundation of God's government, and this is where it's found, right? At the foundation of the throne of God. On top, in addition to the law, the Ten Commandment law, you also had a golden pot of manna that was inside the ark, and also Aaron's rod, which was, as a miracle, had budded, blossomed, and borne fruit. It was an almond branch, and so it bore almonds, which is interesting in and of itself. It's not something to talk about right now. Additionally, although not inside the ark, next to the ark was kept the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, the law. This was something, it was not in the ark, it was next to it, and it was this that Moses later described as being put there as a witness against the children of Israel. That's something that we will talk about a little later on. So that's the holy place. In addition, the high priest would only come in. It was only the high priest who was allowed in the most holy place, and only once a year. And he had to have both blood and a golden censer with incense before he could go into the room. Just outside, on the other side of the veil, you had the altar of incense. This was a golden altar, and yes, it was oriented like a diamond, not like a square. It only had 2 rods. It only had 2 places for it to be carried on the corners, and so it was carried in almost like a compass rather than a square. On the north side, you had the table of showbread, which was the exact same dimensions as the ark. It also had two stacks of bread on top of it, which I already mentioned. That was the showbread, or the bread of the presence. And that bread also had frankincense sprinkled on top of it. Across from the table, you had the golden lampstand. This was designed like an almond tree. It had 7 lamps that were oil lamps with wicks that were actually made from the old torn-up undergarments of the priests, which we'll talk about more later on. And so that's where those are the 3 components the 3 pieces of furniture in the holy place. But there were still bits of furniture. Just outside, at the front door of the tabernacle, was the laver. This was kind of a bird bath looking thing. If I don't mean to speak irreverently of it, but that's what it looks like. And it was a bowl on a stand. I believe it also had faucets or something that would allow you to let water out without actually dipping your hands into it. And they would rinse their hands and their feet before offering a sacrifice, and also before going into the holy place, or the most holy place for that matter. And just beyond that was the altar of burnt offering. This is where the actual animal sacrifices were performed. Now, I didn't put it here because it's not a bit of furniture, but actually just to the north, on the same side as the table of showbread, in between the laver and the altar, was the place of sacrifice. This is where the animals were actually slaughtered. The sinner, the penitent sinner, would come into the tabernacle, and or rather would come into the courtyard, and the priest would meet him there, and they would take him over to the place of slaughter. They would, the sinner would lay his hands on the head of the animal, whatever animal it was, and sheep or goat usually, and lay all his weight on the animal and confess his sin. And then the animal's throat would be slit, and the blood would be caught. Some of the blood would be taken and put on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Some of it would be poured out, and sometimes it would be taken into the altar, to be sprinkled at the altar of burnt offering, at the altar of incense as well. And some of it would get on the veil. That being said, so that's basically what the sanctuary looked like. That's an overview, and the visual aid is something that's very, very important, and because I can't really get an idea of what it looks like without actually seeing it. I don't know if anybody else is that way. I'm not good at picturing things in my mind. I can describe them, I can't picture them, and so having a visual aid at least helps me. So, this is what the old sanctuary looked like. But now, question, what happened in the sanctuary? Right? Because, okay, it was interesting, right? But what happened in the sanctuary? Because there must be something going on. If it looked like, or if it was patterned after something, then surely it must mean something. But what happened in the sanctuary? What happened that was associated with the sanctuary? Well, we can find this in the book of Hebrews chapter 9, because this is the easiest way to summarize it. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 6 to 10. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 6 to 10. Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. So the first apartment, the holy place. But into the second, or the most holy place, went the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. The Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertaining to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks and diverse washings and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation. So what happened in the sanctuary? What were the things done? You can find it mostly in verse 7, and then also, in verse 7 and also in verse 10. Or verses 9 and 10. Verse 7 talking about the high priest going in with blood into the most holy place. So there was a service, a special service, where the high priest went into the most holy place. That was once a year. And then every other day out of the year, the priests went into the first apartment and doing work there. But there was also sacrifices, gifts, and things like that, both animal sacrifices and also sacrifices of grain and other things. These were given as well on the altar of burnt offering, etc. And again, meats and drinks and washings and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation. This is referencing not so much the services of the sanctuary itself, but the ceremonies associated with it. Ephesians 2:15 gives us an interesting depiction on what was going on here. Ephesians 2, verse 15. Having abolished, this is speaking of Christ here, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace. So there are commandments, the laws of commandments contained in ordinances. What law is Paul referring to? Well, it's the law of commandments contained in ordinances. You can also find this, by the way, in Colossians chapter 2, which I believe we will be going to at some point, but I'm going to go ahead and read verse 14. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. So the law of commandments contained in ordinances, or rather the handwriting of ordinances that was against us. What is that? Well, remember, what was next to the ark? Not inside it, but next to it. The law of commandments contained in ordinances that was against us. Ordinances or ceremonies. These ceremonies were the ceremonial laws. So the sacrifices, the feasts, the festivals, all things like that. And you can find that once again in verse 16. Let no man therefore, verse 16 of Colossians 2, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or holiday, a holy day, or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days. Now, many people will get confused on this. Oh, does this mean that we can eat whatever we want, that we can drink whatever we want, or that we can keep the Sabbath, whatever, that we can worship on whatever day we want? We can hold as holy whatever day we want? No, that's not what this is saying. What this is saying is that the ceremonies, more specifically, those things are done away with. The ceremonies associated with these things. So, the ceremonies of washings, the ceremonies of eating foods that may or may not have been offered to idols. You can find this in 1 Corinthians, I think it is, and also in Romans 14, same thing, not referencing Sabbath or of the health laws or the dietary laws, but referencing the ceremonies associated with either food and drink or festal celebrations that were contained not in the Ten Commandment law, but in the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, that were outside the Ten Commandments, these ceremonies and festivals that were to be ended. So it was those that are said in Colossians to be against us, which is exactly what the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, is described as in Deuteronomy, where Moses is speaking. So you have here very clearly a depiction of the ceremonial law here, the law that was contained in ordinances, which was against us. These are the ceremonies. You can find in Leviticus chapter 1, for example, verses 1 through 3. Leviticus 1 through 3, you can find one of the types of laws that was in, of ceremonial laws that were in the ceremonial or ordinance laws. Leviticus chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. And the Lord called unto Moses, and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, ye shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd and of the flock. If his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord. So you have the laws of animal sacrifices or grain sacrifices and things like that. Those sacrifices that were to be offered in the tabernacle, those are part of the ceremonial law. These are things, and so this is one section of the Mosaic law. Sacrifices were specifically to be offered in the sanctuary. You could not offer sacrifices outside of the sanctuary while there was a sanctuary. Before this, there had been sacrifices offered not in the sanctuary because there was no sanctuary. Now, though, sacrifices were more specifically to be offered in the sanctuary. This was partly because there needed to be a separation between what was holy and what was unholy. The tabernacle, the sanctuary, was holy, and the rest of the camp was not set aside. It wasn't sanctified. And so there was partly that need to keep the holy and the common separate from each other. But there was also it was also partly for preventing idolatry, so that you couldn't sacrifice to an idol in the privacy of your own home. And in fact, you could not actually slaughter an animal even if you, outside. You had to go to the tabernacle in order to slaughter it to eat it. So, but there are also other things that are in the ceremonial law. Leviticus chapter 23. Oops, that's too far. Leviticus 23, verses 1 through 4. Leviticus 23, verses 1 through 4. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, Concerning the feasts of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest, and a holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. There were also festivals that were associated. Festivals, ceremonies. Some of them weren't festive. Some of them were very solemn. But some of them were associated, but these were associated with the sanctuary. Although, an interesting thing to notice is that the weekly Sabbath is not included with the other feasts, which is really, really, really interesting. The weekly Sabbath, the 6 days you shall work, the 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day you rest, that is separate, totally separate from the rest of the things mentioned here in chapter 23. It is set aside. It is not of the same character that the other feasts are. This particular ceremony, so to speak, this holy convocation, this Sabbath, is actually founded in the Ten Commandment law, which is separate from and totally disconnected in the sense of enforcement, or not enforcement, in the sense of origin, that from the rest of the laws about ceremonies and feast days and holy days. And so the weekly Sabbath is not associated with them, which means that it's not taken away like the rest of them are, because its foundation is before the ceremonial law was ever given. And that's a whole nother study. But suffice to say, it's not of the same character as the rest of the festivals, and so it cannot be classified with Colossians chapter 2 or Ephesians chapter 2. What was the point of all these ceremonies? Well, here we are in Colossians chapter 2 now, verses 16 and 17. Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. Flipping to the other side of the Bible, Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. Colossians 2, 16 and 17. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body or the substance is of Christ. So what did the feasts and ceremonies do? Verse 17, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. They are symbols, representations of Jesus. That's the whole point of all these ceremonies. Hebrews 10, verses 1 to 4. Wow, it turned right there. Hebrews 10, verses 1 to 4. For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? Because that the worshippers once purged should have had no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins. Now that's really confusingly worded for our modern minds. But you can actually make a bit of sense here. So basically it says, look, these sacrifices of the Old Testament system, the sacrificial system, they could not actually take away sin. They could not perfect anyone who did that. People could not be saved by those things, which is a big misunderstanding. There's a lot of people who think that it was those sacrifices that saved people. That's not the case. People were not saved by them. They could not be saved by them, according to Hebrews, because otherwise, if they could, then those sacrifices would have been offered once, and then people would never have even had a consciousness of sin. They would forget. They wouldn't even know that there were sins, but because there was, they wouldn't sin anymore, right? Because they would be made perfect by it. And these people who had been once clean, once they'd been cleaned from all their sins, from everything else, they would not have thought about sin anymore. Sin would have been gone from them. But those sacrifices were offered year by year by year by year for 1,500 years. And ultimately, the conclusion is drawn here in Hebrews that the blood of bulls and goats and sheep and so on cannot take away sin. It's just not possible. And this is something that's really, really important. All these sacrifices and ceremonies are shadows of things to come. Not the very image of the thing, so they don't look exactly like it, but they're a shadow. They're symbols. They point the way for that. The main problem with these ceremonies, as already stated, is that they couldn't actually do anything. You can't be saved by these ceremonies. They're just ceremonies. They don't save anybody. They can't do anything. They just point. They are supposed to be expressions of faith rather than acts of penance. And it's really, really important to recognize that. So what was the solution? What was the answer to this problem? Well, Hebrews 10, verses 5 to 14 will tell us the answer. Wherefore, when he, that is Jesus, cometh into the world, he saith, Sacrifice and offering thou wouldst not, you don't want, but a body hast thou prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast had no pleasure. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God. Above, when he said, Sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offering for sin thou wouldst not, neither hadst pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that is, the sacrificial system, the sacrifices, that he may establish the second. By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And every priest standeth daily ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God, from henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. For by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. Not the best translation. The Greek tense is continual present tense, and so there it is them that are being sanctified, those who are in the process of sanctification. It's something that unfortunately English just doesn't have for single words. We need a phrase, being sanctified, in order to do that. Greek didn't, so it makes things a little difficult to translate sometimes. But very clearly it says, By one offering he hath perfected forever them that are being sanctified. And so, what is the effective solution for sin? Very, very clearly, it's the sacrifice of Jesus. The death of Jesus Christ on the cross, his death, burial, and resurrection. It was the cross that is the effective solution for sin. Hebrews 9, 13 and 14. For if the blood of bulls and of goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? What is the promise of the efficacy of Jesus' blood? The promise is that his blood will be able to purge our conscience from dead works, from sinful works, from just forms and ceremonies, to serve the living God. So let's summarize. What is Jesus doing now? Well, we know he is high priest. We know his position is that he is a high priest. We know that he is interceding for us. We also know that he's presenting his blood, his sacrifice, on our behalf. Is there more? Well, next week. This is what we're going to be doing. We're starting a new series on the sanctuary, on the tabernacle. We're going to go in depth into this stuff. I am also planning on releasing individual about 10-minute long videos, although this will take a couple weeks to do because I'm actually animating some things for it. So I'm actually animating and designing the pieces of furniture. I have some animation software that I'm doing. So we are starting a new series on the sanctuary. This is probably the single most important series of your life. If you don't study anything else in the Bible, if you don't study anything else, study this. And this is what we're going to be started, because this is the root. This is the foundation upon which all biblical truth really can be found. You can find every single biblical truth in the sanctuary, in its services, in its furniture, in the high priest, in his clothing, in everything that you touch. My dad has a book that was written by a scholar on the subject. It is this thick on the sanctuary. It is astounding. There's so much that needs to be learned, and this is what we're going to be doing these next few weeks, this upcoming time. We're going to be looking at the sanctuary, and again, I am also going to be releasing down the road videos that focus on the furniture, the services, and everything else. It is going to take some time because, again, I am animating these, and that takes time. I have to model everything and do everything else. So that's going to take some time. Plus, I've got to write up scripts and things like that. So, yes. That being said, we are going to be doing this as well, Bible study-wise, in our sanctuary, and we're going to do a deep dive. I'm not as well-versed as some people. My dad, who I believe is, yes, he is here in the Zoom meeting. He is probably one of the most well-versed people I know in the subject. Actually, yeah, he would be. He's, I don't want to brag about him, but at the same time, he's right up there. He's one of the most, probably one of the most educated people out there about the sanctuary. And, I don't want him to get a big head. But, he boasts about me all the time, so I figure I'll boast about him. So, anyway, that being said, we are going to be looking at this, and I'm not as well versed as he is, so I'm going to definitely be learning some things as well here. And this is, man, there's so much, and so it's going to be really, really interesting to take a look at this. There's just so much. So do check us out again at 11:15 Saturdays. We do have these Bible studies, so do check that out. And if you want to check it out, if you aren't able to get there at that time, it is on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook page as well. It will be coming out on those as well, the VODs, the recorded streams. So you can check those out as well. Once again, I am the King's Bard. You can find me on both Facebook and on YouTube. So please do check that out. It's really, really awesome stuff. Lots of archive stuff, and there will be more continually archived things in the future. We are going to be, as I said, not only covering the sanctuary, its services, its furniture, and their relevance for us today. We're also going to be covering their relevance for us today. We are also going to be taking a look, by the way, at some very interesting and somewhat controversial, depending on where you're from, or rather, depending on how well you may have studied the Bible. We're going to be looking at some things that are very clear in the Bible, but maybe a lot of people don't really understand. And so we're going to take a look at that. And because there's some questions that some people may have regarding the sanctuary, and there's actually some interesting things, some very special things about, more specifically, the time which we are now living in. So please do check us out. We are going to be beginning that starting next week. So please, please, please come on out. Now, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and open things up for questions, comments, etc. If you're in the chat right now, please go ahead and do that. I am going to continue speaking, unless there is also questions or comments from the Zoom meeting as well. So I'm going to open things up for that. So Zoom, are there any questions at this time while we're waiting on chat, if there are any questions there? Okay. Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and talk, and if there's any questions here, then you guys, then we'll just wait until they do show up, or comments or anything. So yes, please do check that out. I am really looking forward to this. Remember as well, we not only have meetings on Saturdays, on Sabbaths, we also have meetings on Mondays as well. And those Monday meetings are natural living, natural remedies. Those are some really fun meetings, lots of stuff, and I really look forward to them. I'm an herbalist myself, which is, it's amazing. I love herbs, I love natural remedies, but I also really like sharing those things, and it's really important that we do that. So, and I do it, of course, all from a biblical point of view. So do check us out there. That's Monday nights at 7 p.m., where 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So please do check that out as well. Join us for that. And of course, in a few minutes, we are going to be also doing, at about 12:45, I'm thinking, we will be also doing our Bardic session, which is where we're going to be doing music, hymns, etc. So please, please, please do check that out as well. Join us for that. I'm not seeing any questions at this time. I'm not seeing any questions right now in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that there aren't any. That being said, if you do have questions, or if you're watching the VOD, if you're watching the recorded stream, and you don't know necessarily, if you have a question or something like that, leave it in the comments below, or in the comments. And of course, also hit that like button on the video. If you're on Facebook, then go ahead and like the page as well if you have not already, so that you can get updates whenever we stream. And also when we put out a new video. And if you and if you're on YouTube, then go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get updates when I put out new videos and when I stream as well. So please do come on out for that. I am hoping to put out some music, as well as the studies and the little videos and such on the animated pieces of the sanctuary. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping to put out some other stuff as well. So there should be some fresh content on that. So I'm really looking forward to that. That being said, it is time to close out. If you missed it, I'm sorry, but this will be on YouTube and on the Facebook page as well. So please do check that out. Once again, I am the King's Bard. You can find me YouTube and on Facebook. You can search as well for some of my videos. One of the videos I just put out. It might be easier to find me on Facebook, actually, because I've had some people having trouble finding me on YouTube. That being said, let's go ahead and close out with a word of prayer, and I will see you at about 12:45. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace, for your love, for your mercy, and Lord, that you gave us a pattern, a shadow of things to come, something to tell us everything that we needed to know about the plan of salvation right here in the sanctuary. And Lord, I just ask that you would prepare our hearts to understand those things, that these things would sink in. And I just ask that above all else, Jesus would be lifted up in our hearts as we behold him and as we're changed. I ask that you would prepare us now to praise you in song and in poetry and in whatever other capacity we can. And I ask that you would be lifted up, that the angels would join us in that. Thank you so much. In your name we pray and ask all these things. Amen. Alrighty. Thank you once again, everybody. I will see you guys at 12:45. So